Good afternoon. My name is Katerina Letheria, and on behalf of the Department for Education, I welcome you to the Social Media and Bullying presentation. I have great privilege in introducing the panel today. The panel chair is Sue Gabor, who leads the Cyberbullying and Cyber Abuse team from the Office of the eSafety Commission. Wendy Craig, Professor of Psychology, Queen's University, Canada, and Co-Director of PrevNet. Lelia Green, Professor of Communications, Edith, Cowen University. Barbara Spears, Associate Professor of Education, University of South Australia, and inaugural Chair of the Australian Universities Anti-Bullying Research Alliance. I would also like to welcome those of you who are viewing this session via live streaming today. We look forward to regrouping after these sessions today at 3 p.m. here in Hall C, where Helen Connolly, Commissioner for Children and Young People, will be joined by Anne-Marie Hayes, Executive Director, Early Years Child Development, for their closing remarks, followed by an afternoon break and networking opportunity until the end of the day. So please join me in welcoming our panel today. And I hand over to the chair.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Hope you enjoyed your previous fishbowl. I tried this last time without success, but I'm going to give it another go. It would be really nice if some of you could come closer, because it just feels so much cozier and like we feel the love and it's homelier. So if you're happy to, please, wander down a little bit closer to us. Also, a Slido reminder. You might have used Slido in the last session. You'll just need to make sure you've switched across to this session, because we don't want you sending your questions about social media to the wrong session. All right. And each of our presenters is going to just give a little bit of background for us, and then we'll launch into questions. So start thinking about what questions you'd like to ask and shoot them through, so that this session is really catering to your information needs. All right, we'll start with Barbara.
Hello everyone, welcome and thank you for joining us. So I'm just going to set the scene a little bit for us in this fishbowl, and I'd like to consider the challenges that we face as adults in this social question mark media space, and why it's imperative we engage young people and engage with young people in the process, from problem setting, where we find out what is the problem, to the solution setting, finding ways out of the problem through intervention and prevention strategies. So our first challenge really is the fact that we were born in a completely different era. So hands up, anyone born before 1995? Oh, come on. Born before 1995. Good, okay. Because that's when the internet really first became publicly available in Australia. So young people who were born in 1995 then, of course, are now in their 20s. And if they were born a decade before that, they're now in their 30s and probably starting to think about having their own families, or are having their own families. And they're our next generation of young people and children at school. And those children are going to come to us fully versed in the use of touch screens and digital technologies. They'll be immersed in increasingly visual and image-based, voice-activated, real-time streaming, Uber-connected Internet of Things. So that creates then the second challenge for us. Who are our young people? Well, they're YouTubers, they're Instagrammers, they're influencers and Snapchatters. And they have little demarcation between their on and their offline settings and their worlds. They're ultra connected to everything via multi-screens and images, and increasingly simple modes of expression. They can write whole streams of emojis and interpret it. The third challenge then for us is that they do socialise seamlessly between these worlds. There is no real on and off button for them. They operate in multiple overlapping global networks. They're always accessible, they're always visible, traceable and searchable. There are different audiences all in plain sight. So who are our young people? And then the fourth challenge then is, well, where and how do we intervene? Where are they physically located if we want to intervene? Who are they with? How are they accessing online? How is it being delivered to them? Which devices, which platforms, and how do we measure in this space to know where and how to intervene? And that brings us to the next challenge, because the normal challenge of delivering an intervention or prevention traditionally is an us to them process. that we devise the problem, we gather the data, and we then deliver the solution. So where are young people in these processes? Traditional intervention processes have been adult-directed, outsider-in processes. We need to think about the insider-looking-out process. So that takes us to the next challenge, because adults are positioned as experts. But we have to disrupt that concept. Are we really the experts in this space? We might know about young people and their development and bring our adult wisdom to the problem, but we don't necessarily have their knowledge. And we need to engage with young people as knowledge brokers who can broker their knowledge with us so that together we can find solutions to these problems. The last challenge really to think about is using last century thinking with 21st century adolescents. Social media is changing at a rapid pace. It's increasingly mobile. Social messaging has actually surpassed social media usage. More kids are now using Messenger rather than they are using Facebook per se. Chatbots are becoming the norm. Teens have mixed views about the impact of social media on their lives. Is it positive or not? And a growing share of teens describe their internet use as near constant. Time is no longer an issue. The visual social media platforms are the ones that are growing. Conversely, the more text-based ones like Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn see downturns in actual growth compared to the visual, real-time live streaming platforms. So our challenge is, how do we engage young people in this space so that we can actually work with them and co-create solutions for the problems?
Thank you. That was fantastic scene setting. Wendy, over to you.
I'm going to pick up on several of the themes that Barbara's talked about. The first one is, I think we've really moved away from fear-mongering. We used to be highly concerned about how long students were online, and we used to want to monitor that. And I think that there's been a shift where it's not about how long, but it's about what they're doing and where they are online. And we need to think about the meaning of that shift. The meaning of that shift is that we have to accept that being online is part of life, and it's part of their adolescent development, and it's providing a really important developmental function for them in order to grow and thrive as individuals. So that takes me to the phrase that I often say, which is, there's no app for that. And there's no app for that means that it's not about, learning all the different technologies. We don't have to learn all the different technologies as adults in children's lives. What we have to know about is we have to provide them with the skills and the competencies and the capacities to successfully navigate their interactions online, and to have good media literacy to understand how to be effective online. So I think that we as parents and we as adults in children's lives, we can never keep up. They'll always be ahead of us in terms of the technology and the skill set. We know that they learn the new technology faster, they integrate it more quickly than adults do. So it's a matter about how do we develop the skills and competencies and capacities and relationships with them so that they can be effective online as well and as effective as they are offline. The third point that I want to make is, not only have we moved in terms of not focusing on monitoring and time online, but we've also moved in terms of embracing the technology. We have to embrace the technology and use the technology for good. So a really nice example that I like to give is that we now know that we can have highly effective interventions for mental health problems that involve games. So that there's some research that shows that when we create games that address kids who are experiencing depression and really follow basic cognitive behavioral therapy, it's actually more effective to do it with kids through a game than it is through cognitive behavior therapy. And that it's also more engaging to the user. So now I think our challenge is moving beyond, we have to move into and embrace the technology so that we can use it to work with it in a collaborative and an integrative way to help kids successfully navigate their world. And then the last piece that I want to say is, it's an opportunity for us to allow our children and youth to be leaders and to be empowered. How often do children get to know more than their parents? And what joy does it give them? If any of you are as a parent, just think about that moment when your kid smiles knowing that they know more than you. So this is an opportunity to empower youth and to join with them in a positive way and engage with them in letting them be the teachers for us as the adults in their lives. And we should take advantage of that.
Thank you for that. At the eSafety office, we're firm believers in the 4 R's, which is respect, resilience, responsibility, and reasoning, which is about critical thinking. And I think that dovetails a lot with what you were saying about the sort of values we need to instill in young people when they're online, but I think it applies equally to adults. Anyway, Lelia, would you please?
Thank you. So I've been working in this space since 2002. My area is children within the family context, so families online. And back in 2002, we were still looking at many Australian families having to choose having a dial-up connection. So you chose between going online, one person on one, and disconnecting the phone when you did so. So I was working in this space around about 2006, which is handily halfway between where we find ourselves now and where the 1995 start of where the internet began to become accessible to Australian families, which is where social media really began to take off, with MySpace at that point moving through to Facebook and then the newer social medias. So we've been watching the way that families have tried to keep up, and children have continuously outpaced their parents in adopting new games, new styles of interaction, new ways of relating, whether it's Steam through the game platforms or whether it's through Kik or Snapchat or whatever. And you know, there's a real sense of a dynamic play. And it's only every now and then that children do seek adult help. And at that point, it's really wonderful where the adults have shown enough interest and enough respect and enthusiasm for the skills that the children have to be able to be trusted by the child and for them to be able to talk through the things that are bothering the kids. So having started off with looking at children online back in 2002, I did a study of 400 Australian families, which was part of a much bigger study of 25,000, which involved 24 European nations. And what we were looking at there is the parents' understandings of the risks and the benefits that the children were getting online compared to the children's understandings. And that's one of the pieces of Australian-based information about how very much worse cyberbullying is than most other forms of harm that children come across online. In terms of its pervasiveness, the fact that every time they get in touch with the internet again or see those people again, it can become very difficult. We then went to look at parents and peers, looking at the different roles that parents and peers can offer teens and how teens access that support, which again brings very clearly the risks and benefits to teens around the ways that they negotiate those very close relationships, as well as their technology use. And we've recently started looking at under fives online as well. So it's been a bit of a roller coaster journey in parallel with the absolutely incredible growth of connected media. And what we do know is that there is no doubt that mobile media and children's having their own device magnifies the impact of any sense of distress that they may get from being in touch with negative or violent communications. And so those are the sorts of perspectives that I bring to this debate. And where we know that parents and schools can work together is a place where both feel more able to deal with these problems than either can do apart. So I think this sense of the community that we had earlier this morning is a really important starting point for this discussion.
Thank you. Start those opposable thumbs working and get those questions to us, because otherwise you risk me asking all the questions, so go for it. I will start with one. And research that we've done at the eSafety office and also our experience in dealing with cyberbullying complaints tells us that when young people disclose to an adult, usually a parent, about what's been happening, they want the parent not to freak out and to say, don't worry, between us we've got this. So what sort of advice would you have for an adult when a young person discloses something terrible that's happened online to them?
Okay, I'll start. I think it's really important. The first thing is that we need to set the climate. We need to set the relationship context that enables young people to disclose. And so the first thing that we hear is that they don't want to be blamed. And I think that's a really important, and they want to be heard. And sometimes they don't want solutions. They want to be heard and know that they're still loved and know that they're still cared about. And so I think those are really important messages that we can send as adults in children's lives, that thank them for being courageous, thank them for sharing that information for them, and, you know, ask them what they want from you. Like, empower them in that moment. The other thing I think our job is to keep our children safe. And so we have to unpack what's happened with them. We have to find solutions. I think solutions are, you know, one of the things is that youth don't want to tell adults. And so when they tell adults, it's a gift. And it's a tribute to the quality of relationship that they have. But they first want to tell their friends, and their friends actually don't know what to say to them. But and they're not, adults are one of the last ones that they come to. So I think that we as adults have to create that relationship context. Then I think the second thing is that kids need to know that is when kids are victimized online, the effects are greater than they are face to face. And it's related to the trauma. You re-experience it over and over and over again because it's online. So we can only deal with it when youth tell us about it, and we also have to support them and come up with sort of relationship skills. The other joy about, and it is a positive, about being victimized online is that you have a record of it. And that gives us an opportunity to unpack it, what happened, and to practice what would be appropriate responses to it without being caught in the heat of the moment of the interaction like you would have with a face-to-face. So I think we want to create the environment that lets kids tell. We want to work with them in identifying solutions. We need to monitor them and ensure that the solution that we have agreed to try is working. And if it's not working, we need to follow up and go to the next level.
Thank you. Would either one of you like to add to that?
What she said.
It's getting late in the day now. Couldn't keep us quiet in the last round.
Those questions are coming on through. Thank you, everyone. All right, so the most asked question so far is, how do we teach accountability for the things our children write or do online? Who'd like to have a first stab at that one? Accountability for what our young people do online.
I think it's a lot to do with respect for self and others. So, you know, those fundamental values that I guess most of us adhere to, teaching them the accountability means that there has to be some consequence to the behaviour as well. And unfortunately, when they go online, they often don't see the consequence of their behaviour. It's very easy to push the button and walk away and not know the impact that it's had. And so that accountability for things that they write and do online goes back to being in the face-to-face offline situation about how I see myself and others and how I engage in those relationships, so that, you know, I can, when I go online, think about the consequences of my behaviour.
I think the way that children ought to be taught about accountability is in terms of what their parents are doing. We know there's a lot of conflict already between children and parents over parents' sense of ownership of children's activities in terms of what they post on, particularly Facebook, you know. And parents have all sorts of excuses about, oh, well, grandma wants to see it or such like. And they talk about, you know, and children, even some parents even ask children if they mind things being posted online, and the child says no, and the parent still posts it. And we've got that interview data. So children are learning that, you know, one of the things is that these are disruptors to good relationships, and having a chance to talk about these things, but also the sense that it is possible to back down online, it is possible to apologize, that it is like face-to-face relationships, except that there's a record of it. And you can ask the person to delete their comment, and you can choose to delete your comment. And I think that we should allow people an opportunity. They are children, they don't necessarily know better. We don't act as if we know better on occasions, even though we're the adults in the room. And we should all be trying to help people develop strategies for mitigating the bad examples that we occasionally give and the bad practices that children occasionally practice. And so, yes, accountability means taking some responsibility, but it can also be, I'm going to delete my post, please delete yours, and I'm really sorry, and modeling that behavior. And I think that we should remember that children have been taught something about these things by parents long before they come to school, so that they're all raised within a culture of the way that they operate online before the schoolroom, and sometimes the schoolroom is a chance to reset what is acceptable and what is normal behavior for going forward in terms of their digital footprints.
Thank you. So with all the best intentions, sometimes things do go wrong online and in social media. And eSafety Office research, we did a survey of over 3,400 parents just a few months back to find out their attitude to online safety issues and what concerned them the most. And what concerned them the most was exposure to inappropriate content, contact from strangers, and cyberbullying. So they were the top 3 concerns of parents. And what concerned the eSafety Office was fewer than 50%, so less than half of parents feel confident in how they would respond if their child disclosed to them that they've been cyberbullied. So I'm looking to you, Barbara, here. When social media goes bad, what can parents, teachers, schools do? How can they support the young person?
Oh, firstly, they have to listen to the young person and hear their anxieties and fears, and really be respectful of where that young person is. And then to work in partnership with the organisations around them, whether it be the school in the first instance. And, if it's going to be at a really serious level where they've tried various things and nothing's happened, then obviously the eSafety Commission has a role, and you might like to explain what that means for parents in terms of the reporting of some of this and what constitutes serious cyberbullying.
Yeah, so at the eSafety Office we actually have a piece of legislation that gives us a role in accepting complaints about cyberbullying concerning under 18s. We have an online report form, and a young person or an adult on their behalf can report to us. In about half of cases, it's a parent who reports for the child. And we can take a range of action which includes getting material removed online from the major platforms like YouTube, Facebook, Insta and Snap. So they're the 4 most popular ones with young Australians at this point in time. So that's something that we can help with. So we can help with removal of the harmful material. So that's an immediate harm minimisation strategy. And then where we can, we work with the schools to try and address the conduct if there's also associated behaviour in that school community.
Of course, one of the biggest issues is that once it's out there, you can't really get it all back, and particularly in a school community where something might have gone viral, but amongst the kids. Then I think the school has to manage, what is being delivered around them in a particular way, and certainly in partnership with the parents.
Thank you. This looks very interesting. This is a red flag question in a way. Well, looking for red flags. Are there behaviours that we can look for that are specific to online bullying? So what would tip us off?
Well, I'll start. First of all, there's a significant overlap between those kids who perpetrate bullying face-to-face and those kids who perpetrate bullying online. So we probably have a good idea if we look around and see what are some of the characteristics of those who bully face-to-face, and that will identify us who's at risk for doing it online. So those kids might be aggressive, they might lack self-regulation kinds of skills, they may lack empathy, they may seek out power. So those was what we'd see face-to-face, and that's one way that we could identify those who might be at risk for online. In terms of if you're victimized online, some of the behaviors are kids might be hesitant, they might be shutting down, they might go into avoidance. We always say they just are behaving differently. So if it's really an outgoing child, then suddenly they're less outgoing. And so you have to look for changes in children's behaviors to see if that, and also maybe an avoidance strategy of social media, a lack of connection with you, an avoidance in general, and a withdrawal from you. So there are some kinds of behaviors that you can look for.
So spidey sense sort of thing. Okay. There's quite a lengthy question I'm about to ask, but I might preface it with something because it leads into this question. So you might be aware that recently, there's a lot going on in the cyberbullying and bullying sphere generally around Australia. Queensland Task Force reported recently, and they categorised the concern as being a societal and public health one. And I believe that South Australia is kind of on that path as well. And there was also at the federal level a Senate inquiry back last year which did the same thing. So that is the context for this next very lengthy question. You'll have to bear with me. So cyber harassment is not unique in its context. Research shows it's all the same issues as offline hate speech is and harassment. So racism, sexism, homophobia, body shaming and so on. Yet we still talk about broad concepts such as bullying and cyberbullying. Don't we need to focus more on the societal issues?
Schools are reflections of society. Yes, we do. Yeah.
You're going to say yes.
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 But the thing is that
Unanimous.
Long question, quick answer.
We agree with the people who wrote that question.
but the thing is that although the trigger for the aggressive behaviour may differ, it may be sexist in one case or racist in another, the tools for the delivery, the issue about whether classmates like the aggression or whether they stand up and try and defend the person being attacked, those whole discussions around, how respect and diversity are going to be handled, those are whole of society discussions, and they're ways in which we in educational institutions, all sorts of different institutions have an important part to play in doing that. So I doubt if there's any school in Australia that wouldn't have had discussions around this during the marriage equality debate, any secondary school, and creating spaces in which that diversity is recognised and celebrated is really important as a way of taking the wind out of the sails of people who want to isolate others for their religious affiliation or their gender identity.
Yeah, and I actually want to just add something and say that's a really important question, because one of the things I think that happens and becomes overwhelming for educators is, we have a new issue that we focus on. We focus on bullying, we're going to focus on equity, we're going to focus on diversity. We have to move out of those silos and see what are the underlying similarities among these issues, and know that once we start to recognize, it takes the burden off programming. We don't need a different intervention for each of those issues. We actually need a common understanding about what is respect. We need a common understanding about appreciating and recognizing and respecting diversity, and we also need a common understanding about the use of power and whether we use it in racism or whether we use it when we're cyberbullying. So I think what I really appreciate in that question is it pushes us to move beyond silos and start to recognize the similarities among these constructs and understand that we need to address them from a more holistic understanding.
Well said.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think the power issue is the important one here, and I think that's part of the learning that we can engage young people in, is to actually critically analyse, who has the power and in whose interests is their use or misuse of that power. And then we can start to unpack some of that hate speech and racism and harassment, as well as the cyberbullying and the bullying that goes along with it.
Thank you. Next question. Given that we have many educators here, I think we'll all be interested in the response to this one. What do you believe is the responsibility of schools when the cyberbullying occurs out of hours? Woohoo!
I think the school has a responsibility if the welfare and well-being of the individual is being impacted on by the social relationships within the social dynamic of the school. And it doesn't matter where it happens, because that seamless online, offline is a 24/7 cycle, and it is about the relationships that are occurring in the school that are going online and cycling back and coming forth. So I think the school does have a responsibility, but so too does the community, because it's not just the school's responsibility. it's all of our responsibility to think about what are the impacts, what are the consequences, and how do we reshape behaviour.
So I'll tell you that in Ontario, the legislation is that cyberbullying, whether it happens in or out of school, is a school responsibility, so that they see and the reason behind that is because it affects the school relationships and the climate, and the school climate. So where it happens is irrelevant because of its potential detrimental effects to the school climate. Having said that, the best way to address it is through partnerships and consistent messaging with those in the community. And I think that's a really nice example of it's everyone's responsibility to come together to address cyberbullying, the parents, relevant community organizations, and schools.
And I'd look at it from a children's rights perspective. So I would agree with everyone else before, but there's been a turn to look at children's rights in terms of digital realms. Really, since 2014, it's been growing in momentum. And children have a right to for provision, protection, and participation online. And I think that we have to look at schools as an analogy to workplaces. Children don't have choices as to whether they go to school or not. The legal apparatus puts them in school. It puts them in a place where potentially they are in harm's way if there aren't adequate supports for them. And it doesn't matter whether the cyberbullying happens outside, it's the relationships that they then encounter there. And so from a child's rights perspective to protection, and indeed all our rights to have safe workplaces, I think that it's important that schools continue, because I think they haven't been backwards in coming forwards to be part of the solution. I think it's important that schools continue to see themselves as an important part of the solution, creating a healthy environment in which everybody can learn and grow.
I really like that perspective. And in Canada, we have Rights Respecting Schools.
Yeah.
That's a program put out by UNICEF. And it addresses that very issue. And so I think that's a really important and thoughtful perspective.
I think Europe certainly uses the rights of the child as a fundamental underpinning to any of their bullying sort of programs and development. You know, the rights of the child, and now the digital rights of the child. That's also right. That you were speaking of, Lelia, is a really good way to be thinking of this beyond the school and as part of the community. Yeah.
Wendy, I was quite curious, when you mentioned in Ontario there's specific laws around this, is it a specific piece of legislation, or is it something that's evolved through duty of care, through civil law?
It's in the Safe School legislation.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. All right, next question. What is the best way to support those who have previously been bullied in an online world?
I would say, I'll jump in here. I'm
still thinking.
Yeah. I would say, because this was something that was very forcefully communicated to me by a group of 13 and 14-year-olds, was when they found out I hadn't heard, this is 2013, about the Amanda Todd case study. They inundated me with information about this tragic case study of a teenager who had been bullied, predated upon by what turned out to be a Dutch predator in a Canadian school. But what she said in her own story was the thing that really brought her down, was the fact that she'd moved school 3 times, and each time she moved school, the predator again re-victimized her, and the school community joined in. So she never was able to move away from that. And what the discussion of that case study had done allowed those children to have a step back and look at the behavior and look at the ways in which they could have been the rescuer. They could have been part of a good outcome. You know, they could have been the person that made the difference. And the poignancy of that and the tragedy of that whole story allowed people to look at ways in which things might have happened differently. And so I suppose I feel that if a child was coming to your school and you knew that this child was, in a sense, a persecuted child that had previously been victimized, that to prepare a class and a community in terms of, you know, how should we be treating children in these situations? How can we be part of a solution rather than a problem? Offers a whole range of positive strategies, and people can then start empathizing and identifying. There's also a very handy video about teens react to Amanda Todd, which has been seen by 30 million people, which also has teens' reactions. So this is a very rich case study that's available for schools to use for teens, really.
I also think that we know that there's a link between online and offline bullying. There's a huge overlap. So when you put in bullying prevention programs that address offline bullying, they have an effect on cyberbullying. And so I think from a prevention perspective, having those kinds of programs in place are effective. You have lots of examples. You have an example in Ontario. Sorry, it's getting late in the day. In Australia, the cyber-friendly schools. The Kiva program out of Finland is one that focuses on face-to-face bullying, but is shown to have positive effects on online bullying. And I think one of the two couple things that are central to those, and that should be in the response, which is it's a whole school response. That it's, we need to support the individual who's been victimized. We need to support and address the peer groups and help them understand their role in supporting the youth who's been victimized and in preventing it and showing empathy for that. We need to ensure that our classrooms have norms around that we will be inclusive, that we will work to keep everybody involved and participatory in our classroom. And we need to ensure at a school level that we have a positive and healthy school climate. And so I think that the response is never just one thing. It should be multiple things. It should be monitored. It should be followed up. And it should be continued to be followed up until you ensure that that child is safe and is no longer being bullied.
Yeah, I think it's very easy too sometimes for adults to, when they hear a child comes to them and says this has been going on, sometimes teachers will ask the question, well, what did you do? And that's not a very helpful and supportive response. What did you do? Who did it first? In trying to unpack what's been going on, they actually are not supporting the child who's been courageous and come forward. So, part of the thinking really needs to be around not blaming the victim who comes forward with the information, but to actually reframe the questions that we need to ask. How does it feel for you? What could we do to help? Rather than, what was your role in this?
Yeah, at the eSafety office, we encountered that with the cyberbullying complaints. We're becoming quite empathetic and compassionate in the way we elicit the information that we need. That's because right. We can't act without it. Yeah. And we also have an image-based abuse program, which helps people whose intimate images have been shared without consent, including young people. And it's particularly important there, to make sure that that it's a safe environment and it's completely non-judgy. Mm-hmm. There are a number of people crying out for an answer to this question, and I suspect it might be a bit controversial. Are you ready for it?
We'll try.
Okay. All right. Do you think schools should suspend students for cases of cyberbullying if they're found to have carried out the behaviour?
I'll start.
I told you it's controversial.
And my answer is not going to surprise anyone. Bullying is a relationship problem that requires relationship solutions. So I always think about what's the child learning in the consequence. We need to develop educational consequences so that our consequences help the child learn the kinds of things that they need to learn to be more effective in going forward. So I think we always have to worry about safety. We do have to think about the safety of other children at our schools, but we also have to marry that with how can I support the child who's perpetrated this aggression or this bullying? What do they need to learn? Do they need to learn self-regulation? Do they need to learn empathy? Do they need to learn social skills? Do they need to learn how to use their power positively? What are the things that the child needs to learn? And how can I set the consequences so that that child can learn that effectively? So maybe that's about going and talking to younger students in the school and talking about what the impact of cyberbullying is on people so that you can develop their empathy if that's what they need to learn. Maybe it's about helping them learn how to repair that relationship and writing a letter of apology and taking ownership and talking about what they're going to do moving forward to repair the relationship. But I think ultimately I'll just give the example I always give. If a child failed at math, we would never send them home and expel them. what we would do is we would scaffold and coach them and provide them with the skills and the learning to be successful in math. And we have to do that same kind of approach when it comes to learning social behaviors.
Well said. And of course, you know, we have to ask the question too, will suspension change the behaviour?
No.
And that's, I think, a question that we need to be tackling and talking about and discussing, because there are certainly, you know, going to be levels where a line has been crossed and we need to have some sanction for some sort of behaviour. But we also need to be asking, is suspension the right way to change the behaviour, because that's really ultimately what we want. We want to be able to change that young person's behaviour so they can grow and develop and not be locked in to that cycle of negativity and aggression.
I agree with the other two.
Chicken.
Thank you. I'm sure you'll all have something to say on each one of you will have something to say on this question. Should cyberbullying be treated differently from other forms of bullying, and why not?
Well, I'll go first. So yes, it does need to be treated differently because it is effectively pervasive, in the sense that if someone's being bullied online and they're finding it very hard to walk away from that, then they take that with them. They take that with them home. They take that with them on the bus. They take them with them to bed often. And in that sense, it's a bit like being bullied in a boarding school, or bullied, you know, being exposed to a negative domestic violence situation. There is nowhere you can be totally safe if that's one of your areas in which you get your support and you get your entertainment and your engagement. So we know that children feel the impact far more of bullying when it's delivered via cyber means than face-to-face, because of that sense of pervasiveness. But having said that, it is still about relationships and trying to support children in changing the ways in which they use those technologies, and the ability to choose not to need to have the last word, or to think before you post, and to allow an hour or two to go before you put the response, to practice an appropriate response, as Wendy was saying earlier. Those sorts of responses, cyber does allow you to think before you act, even if you're not old enough to know better, as it were. And that does offer an opportunity forward. And of course, at the end of the day, we do have the capacity to ask other people to take things down, to delete stuff, to do the same ourselves. And in worst case scenarios, we can go to somebody like the eSafety Commissioner, and they have the power to liaise with social media organisations to get material offline. What I would love to see in Australia is something like the right to be forgotten that works in Europe under the General Data Protection Regulation that came into being this May, which allows children, and so far 2.4 million people have taken use of this, to have certain things taken off the search engines so that it doesn't come up with this particular information about them if they don't want it to.
I'd like to continually reinforce the fact that traditional bullying is more prevalent than cyberbullying. And so if we're thinking about the nature of the behaviours and should they be treated differently, we go back to the beginning when we said, well, actually it is a lot of the same behaviours that we're just seeing in an online setting. So let's put a lot of our attention into dealing with the traditional face-to-face types of bullying and educating people about, you know, being responsible digital citizens, and to actually know how to engage appropriately online. Developmentally, you know, a lot of supports around very young children, and as they grow, helping them to make those good decisions and to be savvy about what they are putting out there. So I think we need to, you know, we cannot separate the two really. They are intertwined and they do cycle forwards and back. So unique, yes, but linked to what we already know.
So a bit of a be kind in life, and including online.
Yeah. There we go.
A few people are interested in your thoughts on whether or not, around this scenario, lots of parents put their heads in the sand and don't want to know what their children are doing online. Any suggestions?
Well, you know, the parenting literature shows that, you know, it's a balance between warmth and caring and support and, you know, monitoring your child. So you have to bring those two things, things that are highly structured and monitored, but balanced with warm, bring about the most positive outcomes in children and youth. So I think we have to take our head out of the sands. We have to accept that this is the new way forward, and we have to set limits and boundaries on children's behaviors, and we have to coach them to be effective in that in a warm and caring way that's consistent. So I don't think I've ever seen a problem solved by avoiding. So part of it is, and I think I would actually totally reframe it. It's actually not a problem. It's an opportunity to engage with your child in something that interests them, in something where they're going to spend lots of time, and that they can have the power. Let them guide us, let them show us the way, and use it as an opportunity for engagement. It doesn't have to be negative. I think one of the things that people worry about is that when you think about adolescents, parents in Canada, one of the #1 things that they conflict with their children about is how much they're online. And I actually think that we need to turn that around and understand why they're online, what they're doing online, and use it as an opportunity for us to teach. So I know that I never used Siri before, but now my child's taught me if I use Siri, I can be super effective. So I think it's like, let's grasp those and then celebrate that they can have something to teach us and move us forward in our own development.
Yeah.
I think there's an issue too in that adults use technology differently to young people, you know, and so they're not necessarily putting their heads in the sand, but maybe they're not really across the differences in the ways that young people are engaging with technology, which is, you know, they're talking to their friends online through social media whilst they're talking to them face to face at the same time, and then they're on 3 different platforms also. So it's a different way of using technology. So maybe we need parents to come to the party and actually get up to speed on the difference in the way that they use it and the young people.
Yeah, it's a bit of a conundrum for parents, and I think many parents do acknowledge that they may not be modelling the best behaviour all the time, and they may not be taking the level of monitoring interest they need to at times. Our parent survey that we did earlier this year found that nearly half of the parents were really concerned about the length of time that was spent online, and that was in 2 major ways. Online gaming, not surprisingly, given there's so much talk about gaming addiction, and the other one was social media. So that's where most parents are concerned that there's a lot of time spent.
But can I jump in? Because there's a couple of things that we know that vulnerable youth, such as LGBTQ youth, are, it's a positive for them. They can find online communities where they can seek others who are experiencing similar kinds of issues, or maybe facing similar kinds of challenges, or asking similar kinds of questions in their own lives. So I think, like, we have to really move away from that it's a bad thing, and rather and say it's here to stay, and how can we embrace it, and what are the benefits, and how can we enhance the benefits of being online versus being offline. Similarly, gaming, we do some work with gaming companies, but they're now starting to realize that sometimes in some games it can be a really aggressive context. On the other hand, boys who are highly socially isolated report less isolation and less anxiety because they feel like they connect through games. And
they
so
use the chat function and team up.
That it's fulfilling some kinds of developmental functions for kids that they need. So we don't know. We're still learning, but I think to get into this dichotomy of good and bad is not going to take us to the place and the answers
and
we need.
I didn't mean to reflect on the survey results in that way, and it wasn't my personal opinion either. So no, that was
have to get controversial a bit, or they'd be disappointed.
That's it. The gloves are off now. Just as we come to the end. So I think we can squeeze in one more question. Yeah. Okay. So let's make it a good. Oh, Lelia, I think this will be right up your alley. How accurate is media and popular culture representation of bullying and cyberbullying? Is this helping or harming anti-bullying responses? This has got you written all over it, right?
Yes. Look, the media has never been known to undersell a story. Yes. So, if you want to know the worst possible case in the worst possible, most inflammatory way, then you go to the media, because they're going to tell you that, you know, every child that's played Fortnite is going to end up as a random mass shooter. And every child that's a bully is going to, or that has been verbally aggressive online, is going to be physically aggressive in the playground, and so forth. And so really the thing to do is to check this with your own experiences and with the experiences of other people, and take everything you read in media and popular culture. Well, popular culture, it depends upon the kind of popular culture. Sometimes it's really quite nuanced in a way that the media isn't. But there is a lot of light and shade with all these areas. Please.
I'll keep going because she's pointed too. But I think that's right. You know, like, I think it's not representative necessarily of the normative case of cyberbullying, but you know, that's in the nature of it. So, you know, even the Amanda Todd case, it's a very complex case with many, many issues about it. But it creates this concern or this fear among adults that if my child's cyberbullied, they're at risk for suicide. And we actually know that that's not a link. It's many, many things that can come together and put you at risk for suicide. You know, it's only one part of the story. So I think it's really important that we understand that things, yeah, like the role the media has, and they're going to put forward the biggest case and the most sensational case, but that doesn't represent the everyday case.
Yeah, and also the media does have a bit of a reputation for really having a bit of a go at teachers and about schools not doing enough and schools not really responding. And what I'd like to suggest is that, you know, when those shock jocks really do start to engage in some of those dialogues, that we really need to think about that open two-way communication between the parents and the school in terms of, this is what I've noticed happening, what are you doing, I'll come back to you in a week, how's it been going? So it's a two-way communication process. So because we're not visible in schools when we are actually working on the problem. We don't wear bright orange vests to say we're working on the cyberbullying, here I am. We go about our business and we gather the evidence and we work together collaboratively, but what we neglect to do is to sometimes feed back to the parents what we're actually doing. And I think the media sometimes, you know, rallies the crowds and the troops and says, oh, schools aren't doing enough quickly enough. And I think we owe respect to the educators because it's complex, the behaviours are complex, the relationships, the social dynamics are complex. We need to engage in the time it takes to unravel, but also to feed back. So, if, you know, in terms of does the media blow it up, well, maybe we need to be more open about the communication and the processes we're engaging in.
That's a really good point. Just very recently we had a cyberbullying case at the eSafety office that was resolved very nicely for everyone involved. And the parents actually came back and thanked us, but also commented on how pleased they were with the school's handling of it. And so we drilled down a little bit, because, you know, we like to know what works, yeah. Right? So we went, you know, we went back to the school, asked them what they did, went back to the parents, said, what made you so happy about it? And it was communication. The school, like, you know, got onto it straight away, told the parents what was happening, kept them updated the whole time, and then there was closure as well. So communication is really key. And there are so many more good questions out there. Thank you for them, but I think we've run out of time. So can you please thank our wonderful panellists, Barbara, Wendy, and Lelia.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you to the audience for your questions. That was
absolutely
great.
Thank you.